Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon and part of the MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Hi, everybody. I have Dan Bruton here. Hi, Dan. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I mean, usually I'm the one on the other side asking questions, so I'm a little, even though I have my own podcast, this is kind of weird for me.
First I'm going to tell everyone what we're talking about. But yeah, there's a lot I could say about this, what you just said right there. But so you all might know Dan as a host of the PDX Executive podcast, but he has a lot of other endeavors. So Dan, I'd love for you to just tell us about your endeavors while you introduce yourself.
Yeah, you bet. And thanks again for having me, on the show. So like a lot of Portlanders, I'm a person of many hustles, I like to say, right? It must be our Portland spirit. So, as you mentioned, I'm in the podcast now, my own podcast, actually help companies produce some of them on their own. But my main gig and kind of what I've been doing for almost 15 years is pretty niche. I run a series of small invitation-only conferences for leaders here in town, but also across the country. So that includes CFOs, heads of HR, CIOs, chief marketing officers, all kind of down the line. So I like to say those are kind of private communities for executives, like half Fight Club, kind of half group therapy for themselves. So that's kind of my main thing I do.
So, okay, let's get into that. But first, I want to confirm, is that under the PDX Executive Assembly, or is that under?
Yeah, that's one of them. So they kind of have different names. So my company, I kind of run them under, and this is getting into like, it's not a shell game of LLCs or anything, but it's Agate Executive Communications is kind of the company I run these separate conferences under. So one's called the PDX Executive Assembly here in town. I have one that's called the HR Leadership Forum. I run one in Minneapolis. It's called the Twin Cities Finance Collective. So eclectic naming, I guess, across the different meetings, but similar concept. They're kind of these small private gatherings.
Okay. So let's talk about events right now because, there's almost like two questions. It's like, what happened how did you feel during COVID and what happened? But then also, what's the landscape right now for in-person events?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was talking to someone about this the other day. So I think for a lot of Portlanders, especially, I think a lot of folks, what I love about the city is they run their own, maybe event series or group or meetups. And I was thinking about this in, 2020, it was existential for people who do that. Not only is like a side hustle, but people like me, that's my main kind of thing. And we just kept soldiering on. We all did Zoom meetings and things. And I don't think I had a chance to really stop and reflect about how really like existential it was, and everybody just kept going. So, adapted like a lot of folks. And what I'm finding now, and I always said I was one of those pessimists. And everybody, you get on LinkedIn, it's like everything has changed forever. Everything is, and it's like I'm like, it's not. We're humans. We're going to come back to, things we've done before. And I do feel like for the kind of meetings I do, they're really back. I think the biggest difference is people, and we can get into this, are just more selective of their time. And so whether people want to go to in-person events, I think that's kind of mute at this point. I think people that were and are, but they maybe just might not be going to as many.
Oh, and that's always great, right? I think we were all spread too thin, and that's where we get the hustle culture and all like the negativity. But so with the event, so when was the last time you did an in-person event?
Last week.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
but
So I'm doing,
what was
yeah,
the I'm just kind of also wanting to know what, just for event planners out there, like what is
yeah.
okay to do? Like when did you do an in-person event after COVID? Like when was your first one?
Yeah, I was really cautious. I think I waited until um, probably towards the end of 2021. I think I might have done the first one in person, and even that was probably a little sketchy.
Mhm.
I think there's, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, did you notice a difference between in person and online if you were doing online events like within your communities or groups that you run?
Yeah, and just to kind of some context is most of the things I do, they're small. They're 40 to 60 people. So they're not these like hundreds or even thousands of people of like conventions or anything. So that's a little different level. Um, I think people were appreciative just to come together virtually, just to have some kind of connection. But I think people got burnt out on that pretty fast. And they're still around, they're still convenient. So I don't know. The type of folks that come to my things, whether they're virtual or in person, I don't see I haven't got any pushback, I guess. A lot of people haven't
Mhm.
dropped off when I went to in person, I guess, if that's a way to put it.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you felt if the in-person meetings were more efficient or more effective.
Mm,
And it sounds like it because they dropped off of the virtual.
yeah. Yeah. I'd like to get your thoughts on this too, because I know you go to a lot of business kind of community events here. I don't know if efficient's the way to look. I would say that they've become more, in the way I try to do them is a little less more informal and more around the community that's gathering. So it's not like I'm trying to get you to see this big keynote or anything. I don't do that. I think it's more like let's roll up our sleeves and hey, let's talk about these things in that kind of group therapy session of what's going on with our businesses, what's going on with Portland business community, what's going on with hiring on our teams. Oh my gosh, it's been so hard to get people or keep them. So those are the types of things.
So if you are an executive listening, how do you get invited to one of these events?
I kind of call them the mafia model a little bit. So you have to be vouched for, and they're invitation only. But I think if they're a leader here in town, and you can look me up and find them, I'm happy to have you join one of these. So again, I'm just trying to get a curator right group of leaders. So it's
Mhm.
not like
And is that where your podcast comes in, or what's the
a
connection
little
there?
bit, yeah. So I always say I started my podcast selfishly because I I'm just a curious person, just like you are, Amy. I love to have these conversations. And I think, you were on, my podcast maybe a month or two ago. Thank you for that. And
Thanks for
we,
having me.
yeah, it was fun. And we talked about it. It's a great way to connect with people that is a little more efficient. So you don't have to meet up for coffee, but you can record it too and share. So it came in from that for me, just like, hey, I want to keep a pulse on what are leaders and business folks thinking about, or what are they struggling with, or what can they share. So that it's really just kind of a almost like a passion thing. I just love having the conversations.
Yeah. So I use it also for my, I guess, continuing education because I learn from the
Yeah,
people I have. And so I'm going to ask you something. And in doing so, we will tie into events in a way. And
sure.
also, you will help me prepare because I'm supposed to be on a podcast talking about events in the metaverse.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting.
So,
Okay.
what do you think about that? And of course, I have some thoughts, but I want to hear from an
Yeah,
event planner.
I think I have positioned, I guess the way I think of it, I am intentionally a late adopter to those things. I think they're going to clearly have a place, clearly going to become important. Um, it's going to be, as the technology advances, it could be just as good or similar to an in person experience. And this is the little hidden thing I think maybe it's really a generational thing. I think most of the people that come to my type of events, we're all similar in our station in life. We're probably at this point of our career where we might be similar age, because naturally, as you get to these certain roles, if you're in a company and you're a CFO, you kind of look around at your peers and you're pretty similar in age, whether that's for good or bad, to be debated later. So I think we grew up in a time, at least in the business world, where we feel comfortable in these in-person settings, where maybe folks that are a little younger don't necessarily want to engage that way. And so they'll gravitate toward these new platforms that come up. And by then, Amy, you and I will be hopefully in Palm Springs or Florida.
Yeah.
I don't know, retired. So
sounds good. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I just think, and I could talk a little, you were kind of asking me, well, what do you think about the online events? And
yeah,
I don't do them anymore. So but well, there's a lot of reasons. I can't sit that long. So
sure.
I have to go, go. I mean, ADHD, go. And if I just have to sit and stare, I mean, I don't want to say I don't do them ever, but I don't like them. And it's a
Yeah.
nice way to weed out things. So,
Mm,
because I just put together what I'm going to attend this year. So, what I'm interested in, and I could just easily weed out the virtual ones
yeah.
because I don't really want to connect or network virtually. I don't know why. It
Yeah.
just doesn't work for me. And it feels very flat, I will
Mm,
say.
mm-hmm.
Now, okay, so there's that, right? But then I'm looking into the metaverse and it's like, okay, so I could see, I do think in person is best for me, for my
Mm,
personality type. The metaverse might be a nice medium
mm-hmm.
because it might create literal opportunities for movement or, I don't know how you can network in the metaverse, but apparently maybe networking might be easier. I don't know what you think about that, but
Well, let's talk about networking, because it's a word that, hey, I'm a person that I bring people together, and I despise networking. I despise showing up to something where it's just like, and this is, I know, kind of maybe odd to say because this is what I do, but I approach it a little differently, right? I think, just going into something where it feels like, oh gosh, I'm just like sliding through a room trying to have small talk with people, which is always a part of it, is fine. But if you're going to go to something, and this is what I try to accomplish, is at least make it curated to like, hey, I know this group's going to be maybe even people do exactly what I do and are exactly at the level that I'm at and maybe different company. So number one, like, barriers down a little bit. I know I'm going to get value from that. And then
mhm,
the things we're going to talk about aren't going to be um, real superficial or even too in the weeds. It's going to hit that sweet spot of like an open dialogue that's a little informal. So that's the way I approach it, because I don't, I don't really know what networking is going to look like
mhm,
as we go into that. What you're talking about, the metaverse, I do think that, to what I was saying, I think the metaverse, if it can be curated down into certain things, there's probably more opportunity to do that with that type of virtual medium. So it could actually be better and
mhm.
be easier for folks. So we'll kind of see where it goes.
Yeah. Well, I could see it working well possibly for shows that have, booths, so like
Mm,
some kind of visual component,
yeah.
but other than that, I don't know I don't really see the difference between sitting and listening to a speaker or not, and I know your
Mm,
events, you don't possibly have too many talking heads, but there's always that, a
right.
little bit of that.
Yeah.
So, anyway, but I do wanna touch on what you said about networking, and I do how I envision it is your way of networking is putting yourself in the middle. And what
Right.
you've done by creating these events is you are networking by organizing them and putting yourself in the middle, which for me, I don't so as a PR person, I'm also more comfortable in the background.
Okay.
Um, right? Because we run things. And same
Yeah.
with you with being an event organizer. We're running things, and so you think you might be in the background, but really even possibly as a PR person, but especially as an event organizer, you're in the middle.
Yeah.
because you're running the thing. And
Yeah.
so then everybody knows you. And
Right.
so what I've noticed in various groups where I want to meet people, even if it's like a social group, if I volunteer, then I all automatically have people coming to me saying, hey, I need this, or hey, do this. And it's like, oh, now I know your name. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I think
It's,
that's, I mean, you hit on a really good point because I do find I didn't intentionally, just speaking to me personally, I didn't intentionally, set out to do that. It wasn't some like grand scheme or anything because, I like you, I like being in the background, but I find these positions I am kind of in the middle, right? And you do get to know people ahead of time, or it makes it a little easier. I guess to your point, right?
oh, totally. And because, well, so then I'm thinking of like volunteering, for the kids' school
Hmm.
or whatever. And then it's like, oh, you automatically have friends or and which you could use for networking if you're in the same
Sure.
position. But so then I'm thinking, oh, well, what would we do with PRSA or, these various groups? And
Yeah.
I do want to attend those things because I can take value from that. Like, and
Yeah.
I know I have my friends there and it's just so fun to see people.
Yeah.
And then you also get referrals that way, believe it or not,
Hmm.
even if you're in the same industry.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you mentioned a word that I like to use a lot too. It's like friendship. So
Mm-hmm.
I am, I have my own business. I run my own business, but sometimes I feel like it's, and for better or worse, it's like not a great business person. I do these things because I have become like these people have become friends, and it's become like, it's not a cult or anything, but I feel like it's a fellowship in a way. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in the long run, that is the way to approach, especially if you're a small business person, to approach things like build this kind of fellowship or friendship, and things
Mm-hmm.
naturally will fall into place for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Hopefully.
and I do think so. Networking is a yucky word for some people, especially more introverted people like
Hmm.
myself. Actually,
Mm.
I call myself an outgoing or loud introvert.
That's how I am
But
too.
oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I need my downtime, and also I do get nervous, before going to things, and so. But
Yeah.
anyway, I just think if you have a purpose and some people after a while because you volunteered, it just becomes a little easier.
Yeah.
Um, and I want to find joy in my work, and so when I look at these events, I'm thinking, what is looks fun,
Right. Yeah,
Right.
that's a good thing. Sometimes that's something I forget about, is like, especially in the business world, we might be so focused on bringing people together around a certain topic or challenge, whether it's hiring or talent. And you're like, you have it's good to have an implement, something around. It's gonna be joyful and fun in an environment that's loose, right? So
Mm-hmm.
totally.
Yeah. So then, speaking of your podcast, what are some of the? I mean, you've interviewed a lot of people because you've had that for 6 years.
Yeah, I've done it a little over 200 episodes. So I've been doing it for a while. I mean, I started not knowing, what the heck I was doing, and still working on it. And the podcast technology has changed quite. I mean, it's pretty insane actually how well, here we are. We're doing a virtual podcast. I mean, I didn't do a virtual podcast until COVID. Everything was in person. Even these platforms we're using right now, which is, you know, it's like a Zoom specifically for podcasting, weren't around. So
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it evolve quite a bit.
Oh, it's gotten so much easier for me too, and you
Yeah.
just lose that. Also, just getting your boots on the ground. It's a little bit. You lose a little bit of the hustle there, but
Yeah.
it does make it easier.
Totally.
So out of your 200 episodes, who stands out or what types of,
Mm.
yeah, like names of favorite or interesting guests and also topics that stand out to you?
Oh my God, Amy, you're putting me on the spot.
I'm putting you on the
Yeah.
spot.
Well, number one, I got to remember all who I talked to, which I was going through the other day. I'm like, oh yeah, I've talked to that person. I think, a couple of the people that stand out, I consider them pretty good friends. Is one, his name's Dwayne Hankins. He's now the president of the Trailblazers. And when I interviewed him, he probably was like their VP of marketing. And I've got to know Dwayne. I've known him for almost, 13, 14 years. And I love to see people kind of rise in their career that are really just good people,
Mm-hmm.
and I think for him, he's running the Blazers now. He's just a good person. So getting to know, what, they're humble. They put, their team in front or other people in front. They never want to shine a light on themselves necessarily. And that's the same for that person. And another friend of mine who I interviewed in the early days, his name's Chris Murphy, who's essentially the chief marketing officer for Adidas North America now. And same thing. He was like a director when I interviewed him. I've known him for 15 years, and he's just a good person. So getting to know people is that way, and talk about their family and how they juggle. They got kids. Like that's why they have these careers that from the externally you're looking in, and it's like, oh wow, that's great. That's what's fun for me, and talking about that.
So then how, if you are a PR person, because remember, we are a PR podcast.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
if we want to get a client featured on your podcast, I guess it's a 2-part question.
Yeah.
A, what are you looking for? Maybe a 3-part question. What type of people, what topics, and how do we do it?
100%. And it's a great question because I do get, it's interesting, right? I started this as a personal project, and now I have, been doing it for 6 years. So I do get folks that reach out to me and from PR firms and, recommend guests. And the story is still important. Like when people send me an email of like, and I don't know who this person is they're recommending, and they write a compelling, story of where they started their business or what they really are about. And specifically, if they have like a passion why they're doing it, they might be, have a coffee company or something that not necessarily I wouldn't have on, but I'll have them on because that's interesting to me. So, folks that have small businesses that are growing them and, have a unique kind of niche in the world. And I think this applies to other podcasts too. I'll absolutely. I read them when people send me recommendations. I read every one, and if it's compelling, like I'll say, "Hey, thanks. I'd love to have them on." So the story still matters. Absolutely.
So story behind who the person is, but but are there any specific topics that you want to touch on, or are you more interested in profiling the guest?
Yeah, I think there's yes and no. So the guests themselves, the person, but I'm just going to be selfish here. I'm really interested in tech. I'm really interested in B2B tech and SaaS and what's going on there, especially if it's in the Pacific Northwest. I'm really interested in how are, companies getting capitalized, especially now, right, with venture capital and stuff being maybe a little more tight. So that's interesting to me, and even having conversation of how did they raise money to start their business? Are they bootstrapped? Did they get outside funding? How'd you do it? Who'd you know? That's always super interesting to me.
And so it doesn't have to be that they're based in Portland. Is it Pacific Northwest now?
Yeah, pretty much Pacific Northwest. And many of the people are in Portland still, but I get some folks that are even nationally. Maybe they wrote a book on leadership that's kind of interesting. So yeah, even national.
Yeah. I mean, because it could apply to all PDX people anyway. So
for sure.
Might as well. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for coming on, and we really appreciate it. And good luck with all your endeavors.
Thanks, Amy.
It was a lot of fun.
For more PR insight, be sure to check out Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, at prtalk.co. Also, please subscribe, rate, or leave us a review.